Well, hello there, Biology 20s. I had a couple of students attend today's Google Meet, and I just wanted to go through and make a short video that clarified some of the stuff from last week that we had on our assessment. So I get a little report with my Google Forms that showed me questions where students didn't do too hot on, and so I'm for sure going to go through numerical 4 and question A here and talk a little bit about last week's assessment and then start also going through what you need to know for this week's assessment. So one of the questions that students really struggled with was, where does physical digestion begin? Well, if I was to write the word, I would say it begins in the mouth. Right? We're chewing things and we're using our tongue to form a bolus. Okay, so physical digestion happens in the mouth. Now, a lot of students seem to think that number 2 here is the mouth. It is not. It is one of the salivary glands. And so you have all of these salivary glands that make saliva. So you have some of them up kind of in your cheeks and in your upper jaw. You also have some below your tongue. And so the question here, where physical digestion begins, the correct answer was number 1. That's the mouth or oral cavity. Number 2, the salivary gland, is what is going to produce saliva. Now, inside saliva is a secretion. It's a fluid, a liquid that comes from a gland and it goes to a different area and it goes into the mouth. And it has some things in it that help you with digestion. It has an enzyme that's called amylase, and that enzyme amylase helps you to digest starch. So not only do you have physical digestion beginning in the mouth, but because these little salivary glands are putting this saliva into your mouth, you're also beginning your chemical digestion in your mouth as well. Okay, so that one was not all that well done. And again, a lot of students, I guess, produces salivary amylase. No, the mouth does not do that. The salivary gland does, okay? Here, numerical 4 was one where students really struggled, and so I want to go through that. So which substance neutralizes chyme? Well, remember that chyme has a lot of acid in it, and so it has a very low pH, and that is getting into your small intestine, and that would really harm your small intestine. So the pancreas sends to the small intestine this sodium bicarbonate to help neutralize and bring the pH back to a neutral level of 7. Okay, and so the sodium bicarbonate ions are doing that. What is going to kill the bacteria? Well, we talked about this, actually when we did, circulation and immunity. And the hydrochloric acid that's in your stomach kills bacteria and foreign invaders. It's one of the first lines of defense, right? We talked about how your skin was, sweat was. Well, so is the acid in your stomach. Now, here's the one that a lot of students missed. I'm looking for what chemically digests fat. And a lot of students chose bile. That is not correct. Bile physically digests fat. And what it does is it takes big fat blobs and it breaks them down into smaller fat blobs. It's not breaking them into their chemical components. It's just increasing the surface area for the enzymes to get at. What enzyme? Lipase. So the enzyme that chemically digests fat is actually lipase. And finally, what helps the stomach to protect itself so it doesn't digest itself? Well, that would be mucus. So not only are you secreting hydrochloric acid, but you are secreting this mucus so that your stomach will not digest itself. So 5723 was the correct answer there. Okay, so last week we started respiration and we did what's happening in the anatomy and the job of each part. And another major concept was these different types of respiration. So in your lungs, you have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of these little air sacs. Alveolus is one, alveoli refers to many of them. And so in your lungs, that's where gas exchange is occurring. So the blood that is coming into your lungs is coming from your body and it has a high amount of CO2. So you have to get rid of that CO2 and breathe it out. Okay, so you're exchanging gases in the lungs. And at the same time, the oxygen coming in from the air is going to make its way across this really tiny little membrane here of the alveolus, and it's going to go into the capillary, and then it's going to be taken to your body. So then in your body's cells, here's our next place where gas exchange is occurring, and that's what we call internal respiration. So it circulates to your body, and now we have this high amount of O2, and then it is going to enter into your body cells, and your body cells take in that O2 and they undergo cell respiration in the mitochondria. They produce energy, but they're also producing this waste CO2. So all of that CO2 that builds up is now going from your cells. It's diffusing across the cell membrane into the capillary. And again, that is going back to your lungs. Okay, so it goes to the heart and back to your lungs for you to get rid of. So those are the three types of respiration that's going on in your body. External, happening in your lungs. Internal, happening in your cells to give them oxygen. And cell respiration. So you should be able to label and know the different functions of the different parts of your respiratory tract. And those are the questions you see this week on your assessment. And that is informative this week. And then we're moving on to mechanics of breathing. And so when we talk about mechanics of breathing, we're talking about these two events. We're talking about what happens when you inhale, when you breathe in, and what happens when you exhale. So inhalation, when you're breathing in, is all about contraction. So here's this big skeletal muscle here called the diaphragm, and it contracts. And when it contracts, it causes it to flatten out. And you also have these little muscles in here called your intercostal muscles in between your ribs, and they contract, and that causes your rib cage to move up and out. So what's happened is the volume of your chest cavity or thoracic cavity has gone up. So the pressure then is doing the opposite. They're always doing the opposite. This is an inverse relationship, and that means that the pressure inside of the chest is gone down. So you have a low pressure inside here, and you have a higher pressure outside in the atmosphere, and that's why air goes in. Okay, so inhalation occurs when you're breathing in. The opposite of this, obviously, is exhalation. You exhale, you breathe out. And so when that's happening, everything here is all about relaxation, right? The diaphragm relaxes, the intercostals relax. So you can see that the diaphragm has reassumed, it's kind of an upside down U shape. And these intercostal muscles are now relaxing. And so your chest cavity has gotten smaller. Your ribs have gone down and in, so the volume has gone down. That means that the pressure inside of your chest cavity has gone up. So now you have a high pressure inside here, and that's compared to a lower pressure outside here, and so now air is going to move out. Okay, so those are the two major events in mechanics of breathing, inhalation and exhalation. Next, gas exchange. So when we talk about gas exchange, we have to know that there's two ways of transporting oxygen. 1% of oxygen is in the plasma. And here's a little red blood cell that I'm drawing. It's got this kind of funny shape. It looks like a little ear or something, but it's not. But you have millions of these little hemoglobin molecules inside of the red blood cell. And so the majority of your oxygen is binding to these little hemoglobin molecules. And so most of your oxygen is carried in your body in the red blood cell bound to hemoglobin. It's called oxyhemoglobin. It's bright red. CO2, there's a different story, and you got to know the percentage for O2 and CO2 and know the percent for each way. So some is in plasma, some is in hemoglobin. So same deal here, the hemoglobin combines CO2. But here's the major difference, and this is what I want you to cue into. The fact that these bicarbonate ions is the major way that CO2 is being carried. So in your body cells, as we just mentioned, you're creating CO2. And the CO2 is going to enter into your bloodstream, and it combines with water in there. And then you have this enzyme called carbonic anhydrase that is going to put together the CO2 and H2O. And so that enzyme then inside of the red blood cell, here's the red blood cell again, it's going to combine those two molecules to make this acid, carbonic acid. And then because it's an acid, it just breaks apart into hydrogen ions. That's why acids are acidic. They have hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. So we mentioned that bicarbonate is the main way that we are transporting CO2, and that is correct. So now this red blood cell is floating through your bloodstream. It's got the bicarbonate bound to it. And then when it gets into your lungs, the exact reverse process is going to occur. So here's an alveolus, and you want the gas exchange to occur, and so the exact reverse reaction is going to occur. The hydrogen and the bicarbonate get back together to form H2CO3. And now the carbonic anhydrase enzyme is going to break that apart into H2O and CO2. CO2 can then diffuse, very thin membrane here, the capillary and the alveolus, and then the CO2 can be exhaled out the alveolus. Okay, so that is how carbonic anhydrase becomes very important in transporting CO2 and the exchange of gases. And finally, the last thing we talked about this week in our notes was the regulation of breathing. And so a lot of students are surprised when we see that CO2 is more important than oxygen. And we have these chemoreceptors. They respond to chemicals and mainly CO2, right? Like I said, CO2 is the more important gas. When you have too much CO2 in your bloodstream, your body kind of freaks out a little bit. These chemoreceptors send a message to the brain, the medulla, and it says, all right, let's get rid of this. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to increase the breathing rate. We're going to exhale more, get rid of more of that CO2. So you start breathing more rapidly, and you're going to increase your breathing rate to get rid of that extra CO2. Okay, so that's it for now. If you guys have any questions, you're always welcome to email me. And I hope you have a nice rest of your week and get your assignments in on time. Okay, take care. Talk to you later.